Find your own space, Lucy. There's simply no room for you here anymore. My daughter Cindy's words still reverberated in my mind like a somber knell as I finished packing my last piece of luggage in the master suite of my new residence. 3 weeks had passed since that utterly mortifying public spectacle. Now here I stood, gazing out of the floor-to-ceiling window of my multi-million-dollar high-rise apartment, watching sailboats drift serenely in the harbour below, while my family was likely facing homelessness, wondering where on earth they would find shelter. My name is Lucy Brooks. I am 71 years old, and for the past half-century, I was the unwitting benefactor of an entire clan of dependents. Yes, the truth is that blunt. Yet this morning, as the Mediterranean sun warmed my face through the bulletproof glass of my new abode, I felt an unburdened sense of liberation. It all commenced precisely 52 years ago, when I exchanged vows with Roberto in a quaint church nestled in Savannah, Georgia. I was 19, he was 23, and we were both brimming with aspirations and utterly devoid of funds. Roberto toiled as a mechanic, and I worked as an administrative assistant at an accounting firm. We resided in a modest one-bedroom dwelling that carried the lingering scent of motor oil and overbrewed coffee, but despite the austerity, we were blissfully, incredibly happy. The initial years were nothing short of enchanting. We awoke each morning entwined in each other's embrace, shared a simple breakfast of pancakes and black coffee, and charted our course for the future while the radio hummed with rhythm and blues. Roberto possessed calloused hands but a tender touch. As he caressed my hair each night, he pledged to one day procure for me the most exquisite home in the world. For my queen, he'd often declare, bestowing a gentle kiss upon my forehead. Cindy made her arrival when I was 21. She was a perfect infant, her large, inquisitive eyes seeming to absorb the essence of everything around her. Roberto would hold her for extended periods, serenading her with fanciful tunes about princesses and castles, while I observed them from the kitchen, my heart feeling as though it might burst with overwhelming joy. Those cherished moments when it was merely the three of us against the world remain the most beautiful chapters of my life. Michael entered our lives 3 years later, a placid and smiling child who completed our idyllic little family. By then, Roberto had diligently saved enough for the down payment on a modest house in the suburbs. I distinctly recall the day he drove me there, my eyes covered with a blindfold. It was an unassuming 2-bedroom dwelling with a small garden adorned with pink azaleas and a lemon tree that yielded fruit year-round. "It's ours, my dearest," he whispered in my ear as tears of happiness streamed down my face. Our house, our sanctuary. Over the subsequent 15 years, we meticulously cultivated a beautiful life together. Roberto expanded his automotive repair enterprise, and I honed my skills in accounting, offering my services to local small businesses. On Sundays, we would host lively barbecues in our backyard. Cindy and Michael would frolic amongst the foliage, chasing butterflies, and I felt like the most fortunate woman on earth. Roberto always maintained that our home possessed a peculiar allure, an energy that welcomed all. Perhaps that was my undoing. When Cindy reached 16, the stream of visitors began. First was my sister Elaine, recently divorced and seeking a temporary respite to regroup. Roberto, with his magnanimous spirit, promptly renovated the basement to afford her privacy. "Family is paramount," he'd assure me, embracing me from behind as I attended to household chores. "There will always be ample space for those we hold dear." Next arrived my brother-in-law, Charles, Roberto's younger sibling, who had lost his employment and his residence. We offered him the guest room, assuring ourselves it would be a brief arrangement until he re-established himself. However, Charles possessed a remarkable talent for devising justifications and deferring accountability. 3 months stretched into 6, 6 into 12, and before I realized it, we had a 30-year-old man residing under our roof, completely rent-free. Roberto never voiced a complaint. He was a man of unwavering principles, instilled with the conviction that aiding family was a solemn obligation. He labored 12 hours a day to manage our escalating expenditures. He would return home utterly exhausted, yet invariably with a smile, always inquiring about my day. At night, when we finally retired, he would hold my hand and murmur, "This is merely a temporary situation, my love. Soon it will be just the two of us once more." But Roberto was unaware that temporary had transmuted into permanent. When Cindy married George at the age of 23, it was natural to assume they would establish their own independent living arrangement. George presented as an ostensibly driven young man, a recent business school graduate with grand ambitions and persuasive pronouncements about the future. The wedding was resplendent, held in our backyard, festooned with white roses and golden ribbons. I remember Roberto dancing with me that evening beneath the twinkling string lights, whispering that soon we would be graced with grandchildren scampering about the house. Just for a little while, Cindy informed me a week after their honeymoon, her suitcases once again occupying her childhood room, until George secured his ideal position and they could accumulate the necessary funds for their own place. George offered a smile, that peculiar smirk I would later come to detest, a disconcerting blend of arrogance and feigned humility that master manipulators expertly deploy. "Just for a little while" became the prevailing refrain in our household for the subsequent 30 years. George would secure employment, only to relinquish it due to disagreements with his superiors, and he always possessed a brilliant rationale for why the next opportunity would be the one. Meanwhile, Roberto and I continued to shoulder the mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery expenses, and the myriad caprices of a family that proliferated with the speed of weeds in a downpour. Michael, my sweet and reticent child, evolved into a rebellious adolescent who withdrew from community college after his second semester. "It's not suited for me, Mother," he confided one afternoon as I ironed his attire. "I'd prefer to explore my creative inclinations." His creative pursuits encompassed strumming his guitar until 3 a.m, indulging in marijuana in the backyard, and bringing home a different young woman each week, who also, coincidentally, would linger for dinner. Roberto worked increasingly longer hours. His dark hair began to be interspersed with streaks of silver, and the lines around his eyes deepened, yet he never relinquished that gentle smile that had captivated me from our very first encounter. At night, when we were finally alone in our bedroom, he would embrace me and whisper, "This will pass, my beloved. The children require time to discover their paths." But I was beginning to harbor doubts as to whether they ever would. The house became filled with incessant noise. George would watch television at maximum volume in the main living area. Michael would practice his guitar in the garage. Charles would arrive home intoxicated on weekends, accompanied by boisterous companions, and Elaine had commandeered the kitchen as her personal domain, stocking the refrigerator with expensive organic provisions that only she was permitted to consume. My tranquil, loving home had transformed into a chaotic boarding house for irresponsible adults. When Cindy became pregnant with Kelly, I harbored the hope that she would finally find the impetus to achieve independence. Instead, she announced their intention to reside with us until the baby was older and it was deemed safe for them to relocate. Kelly was born on a rain-swept Tuesday in April, and Roberto wept with joy as he held his first granddaughter. "We shall truly require more space now," he confided that evening, mentally calculating how we might extend the house without plunging into insurmountable debt. We constructed a second story using our retirement nest egg, The ensuing years were a blur of ceaseless expenditures. Kelly necessitated designer diapers, specialized formula, educational playthings, and an array of designer garments that Cindy deemed appropriate for her daughter. George had secured a position as a door-to-door insurance salesman. However, his commissions fluctuated considerably with the seasons. Thus, Roberto and I continued to bear the brunt of the family's financial obligations. Michael reached 30 years of age without ever holding down a position for more than 6 consecutive months. He perpetually concocted ambitious ventures that demanded initial capital infusions. A rock band poised to record the album of the century. An organic food enterprise destined to revolutionize the industry. A YouTube channel projected to elevate him to millionaire influencer status. Roberto, with his inherent generosity, always managed to allocate funds for these improbable aspirations from our dwindling resources. When Roberto succumbed to a sudden cardiac arrest at the age of 58, my world imploded. He was in his repair shop, working on a truck engine when he suddenly collapsed. The paramedics stated it was instantaneous, that he had suffered no pain, but that offered no solace for the gaping void that had opened in my heart. My life companion, my partner in dreams, my secure haven was irrevocably lost. The funeral was a somber, well-attended affair. Roberto was beloved throughout the neighborhood, held in high esteem for his integrity and benevolence. For 3 days, the house was replete with floral tributes, sustenance, and the expressions of grief from numerous individuals. But once they departed and silence reclaimed its dominion, I apprehended a chilling reality. I was the sole individual who genuinely missed him. To my family, Roberto had been the convenient provider, the amiable uncle who invariably acquiesced, but not the emotional bedrock he had been for me. Cindy embraced me at the cemetery and declared, "Do not fret, mother, we shall attend to you." At that precise moment I interpreted her words to signify emotional solace, companionship, and affection. I failed to grasp the true import of her statement. "Now, you bear the sole responsibility for our collective sustenance." Roberto's inheritance comprised the house, which was fully amortized, a modest savings account, and the repair shop. I divested the business as I lacked the requisite expertise to manage it. However, the proceeds enabled me to sustain the family while I navigated my profound sorrow. For months I drifted through the house like a spectre, preparing meals out of rote habit, laundering clothes from sheer routine, existing without truly living. Michael exploited my state of vulnerability. "Mother, I require funds to establish a recording studio. Father had pledged to assist me when he possessed the means." That was an untruth. Roberto was always prudent with finances and would never have sanctioned such an expenditure. Yet I, adrift in a sea of sadness and guilt, dispensed $20,000 from the savings. The studio, as it transpired, consisted of used equipment that he subsequently liquidated 6 months later to settle gambling debts he had been concealing. George also harbored aspirations to honor Roberto's memory. He envisioned expanding the house further to create a communal sanctuary where we could all reside permanently in comfort. The construction incurred a cost of $50,000 and transformed our garden, once vibrant with azaleas, into a stark and utilitarian concrete patio. When I voiced my objection to the loss of the lemon tree that Roberto had personally planted, George patiently elucidated that alterations are essential for familial advancement. Elaine had permanently established herself in the basement, which she had outfitted as an independent living space using my funds. Charles continued to occupy the guest room, now a personal sanctuary overflowing with empty bottles and soiled garments. And Kelly, now 8 years old, perceived me as the benevolent grandmother who indulged her every whim without limitation. At 65 years of age, when I ought to have been savouring my retirement alongside Roberto, I found myself employed part-time as a freelance accountant to financially sustain 8 adults who resided in my home without contributing to expenses. My pension barely covered the essential utilities for the expanded dwelling. Consequently, I required supplementary income for sustenance, apparel, diversions, and the perpetual stream of emergency loans that were invariably unreturned. The nights were the most arduous. I would recline in the marital bed that Roberto and I had shared for decades, listening to the cacophony of laughter and conversations emanating from throughout the house, feeling profoundly solitary amidst a multitude. I would touch his vacant side of the bed and murmur, "What would you do, my love? How would you navigate all of this?" But Roberto could offer no reply, and I remained far too accommodating, too conditioned by years of appeasing others, to establish genuine boundaries. Every attempt I made to discuss responsibility or self-sufficiency was met with reminders that family is paramount, and that Roberto would have been proud to witness my dedication to their care. Lies, meticulously crafted and convincingly delivered, served to ensnare me within my own home. The subsequent years witnessed a precipitous decline, marked by increasingly audacious demands, and my progressively diminishing resolve. Kelly turned 15, and Cindy decreed that she merited a celebration befitting a contemporary socialite. Not a modest family gathering at home, but a grand event at a venue, complete with an orchestra, a designer gown imported from Italy, and 200 attendees. The initial budget presented was $30,000. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime occasion, Mother," Cindy explained as we perused catalogues at the dining room table. Her impeccably manicured nails glided over the pages as if she were perusing a casual magazine, not orchestrating an affair that would deplete my remaining savings. Father would have desired the absolute best for Kelly. You comprehend how deeply he cherished his granddaughter. Kelly, a recipient of her parents' manipulative tendencies, sat beside me on the sofa, enfolded my aged hands within her young, tender ones, and gazed at me with those expansive eyes that so powerfully evoked Roberto. "Grandma, all my friends are having spectacular parties. I don't wish to be the sole one with a modest celebration. Please you understand the immense significance of this for me. How could I possibly decline that angelic countenance? How could I be the parsimonious grandmother who denied her granddaughter a pivotal moment of her adolescence?" Roberto had always maintained that cherished memories constituted the finest investment one could make. Consequently, I withdrew funds from my contingency account and financed a celebration that rivaled lavish weddings. The spectacle was breathtaking. Kelly resembled a fairy tale princess. The band played until 3 in the morning, and the guests continued to commend the event's elegance for weeks. However, when the final invoices arrived, the actual expenditure had surpassed $45,000. Between the last-minute alteration to Kelly's attire, the additional floral arrangements that Cindy deemed absolutely indispensable, and the open bar that George expanded without my prior consent, my contingency fund was entirely depleted. "It was an investment in family happiness," George offered by way of consolation that evening, patting my shoulder condescendingly as I reviewed the statements. "Kelly will forever cherish that her grandmother orchestrated her dream party. That's invaluable." Michael, emboldened by the generosity I had extended to his niece, deemed it the opportune moment to solicit support for his latest business endeavor. He had encountered Ava, a 35-year-old divorced woman with 2 young children, and he was eager to impress her by projecting an image of a serious entrepreneur. His aspiration was to launch an artisanal coffee shop in the city center, a venture he described as authentic and groundbreaking, capable of rivaling the established chains. "Mother, this presents my opportunity to accomplish something Father would have esteemed. he confided one afternoon while Ava engaged with her children in the concrete expanse that had once been my verdant sanctuary. Ava possesses extensive experience in hospitality. I understand music and ambiance. Collectively, we can create something extraordinary. We merely require $60,000 for the initial equipment. $60,000. The sum struck me with the force of an icy slap. My contingency savings were non-existent. My pension scarcely covered the fundamental household expenses, and I had been undertaking additional accounting assignments to offset the cost of the quinceanera. However, Michael's hopeful gaze mirrored that of the sweet boy he once was, and Ava offered me a smile from the yard as if she were already an integral part of the family. I do not possess that sum readily available, I explained, attempting to adopt a resolute yet tender tone. We would need to explore alternative avenues, perhaps a bank loan under your name or the pursuit of investors. The banks will not grant me a loan due to my employment history, he interjected impatiently, and external investors would seek to control the enterprise. I require my family to place their trust in me. Father always maintained that family invests in family. That phrase, always that phrase, which transmuted any refusal into an act of familial betrayal. Roberto had been generous indeed, but also prudent and pragmatic. He would never have sanctioned such a speculative investment with funds essential for our survival. But I was weary of being perceived as the ungenerous antagonist, fatigued by disappointing my children, exhausted from bearing all difficult decisions in isolation. I mortgaged the house. The bank sanctioned an $80,000 loan, utilizing the property as collateral. It was a desperate and precarious decision, but I rationalized it by assuring myself that the coffee shop would prove successful, that Michael had finally discovered his true calling, that Ava would provide the stability he required. With $60,000, I financed my son's enterprise, and the remaining $20,000 I allocated as a renewed emergency fund. The Bohemian Soul coffee shop inaugurated with considerable fanfare 6 months later. Michael had meticulously adorned the establishment with vintage musical instruments, monochrome photographs of renowned musicians, and rustic wooden tables that had commanded a substantial price. Ava managed the kitchen with professional efficacy, preparing artisanal pastries and gourmet coffee beverages. For the initial few weeks, the establishment teemed with curious patrons, and the ambiance held promise. But Michael remained Michael. Instead of concentrating on business management, he became fixated on transforming the coffee shop into a late-night musical venue. He engaged local bands, installed a professional sound system, and initiated open mic nights that extended into the early hours. The neighbors lodged complaints regarding the noise. The morning clientele ceased their patronage due to the ambience of a dive bar, and operating expenses escalated dramatically without a commensurate increase in revenue. Ava endeavored to maintain equilibrium, but Michael refused to heed counsel. He was living out his fantasy of being a rock star entrepreneur, financing his ego with my mortgaged funds. When she proposed pragmatic adjustments to enhance profitability, he accused her of lacking faith in his artistic vision. When I attempted to discuss financial statements and cash flow, he informed me that I failed to comprehend the creative essence of contemporary entrepreneurship. 18 months elapsed, and the Bohemian Soul shuttered its doors permanently. Liabilities to suppliers surpassed $30,000. The equipment was repossessed to satisfy a portion of the outstanding obligations, and Michael descended into a profound melancholy that confined him to his room for 3 months. Ava, understandably, terminated the relationship and relocated with her children to another city. I was left with an $80,000 mortgage on a property that no longer felt like a home, surrounded by adults who viewed me as their personal ATM, yet vanished when I sought emotional support. The loan payments consumed the majority of my pension, compelling me to work full-time at the age of 68 to sustain the family's precarious financial standing. Charles had lost another position and had commenced a more systematic pattern of alcohol consumption. He would arrive home at all hours, create disturbances in the kitchen, leave empty bottles scattered throughout the house, and when I attempted to address his behavior, he would retort that he was experiencing a difficult period and required familial understanding. Elaine consistently defended him, arguing that men process adversity differently and that I ought to exercise greater patience. George had determined that he warranted a home office now that insurance sales had transitioned predominantly to digital platforms. He converted the garage into his personal workspace, installing air conditioning, high-speed internet, and ergonomic furniture that I procured without fully comprehending their purpose. He spent hours sequestered within, ostensibly engaged in work, but I suspected he was primarily observing online sports and browsing social media. Cindy had developed a predilection for cosmetic treatments and compulsive shopping. Each week, she would return with an abundance of new attire, Japanese skincare products, or designer accessories that were available at irresistible discounts. When I remarked that family expenditures were spiraling out of control, she would remind me that she labored diligently in raising Kelly and merited small indulgences that enhanced her self-esteem. Kelly, now 17, had inherited her parents' sense of entitlement, amplified by the generational arrogance characteristic of contemporary adolescence. She desired the latest iPhone, exclusive designer clothing, excursions with friends to fashionable beaches, and private driving lessons accompanied by a vehicle for practice. Every one of my rejections was met with theatrics, worthy of a daytime drama and expertly applied emotional coercion. "Grandma, all my friends possess these items," she would lament, genuine seeming tears meticulously shed. I fail to grasp why our family must be so exceptional. My peers will surely perceive us as impoverished. The irony struck me with the force of a sledgehammer to the sternum. I indeed was impoverished, toiling like a drudge at the age of 70 to sustain the opulent lifestyle of 8 individuals who had never once contributed a single penny to the household's upkeep. Yet they lived as if they were members of the well-to-do middle class, operating under the assumption that my capacity to generate wealth was boundless and my duty to provide was perpetual. On the evening of my 70th birthday, not a soul recalled the occasion. That night of the forgotten anniversary served as my stark and unpleasant awakening. I remained seated in the kitchen until 2 in the morning, gazing at the modest confection I had procured for myself. The sounds of merriment emanating from the basement, where Elaine was engrossed in films at a considerable volume, and the boisterous shouts of George celebrating some sporting event in his garage den. The residence pulsed with activity, yet I felt utterly unseen. Roberto would have remembered. Roberto would have risen and sung a birthday greeting. He would have adorned the breakfast table with blooms from a garden no longer in existence. He would have orchestrated a family supper where, for one evening, I would have been the sole focus. However, Roberto had been deceased for 12 years, and I had permitted his absence to morph into my servitude to individuals who were oblivious to my very presence. The subsequent day, Cindy finally registered her oversight upon discovering the partially consumed cake in the refrigerator. "Oh, Mum, it was your birthday yesterday. How utterly remiss of me." She embraced me with that exaggerated fervour she employed to mask her neglect. "I shall endeavour to compensate you. I give you my word. This weekend I will escort you for a meal at a charming establishment." Yet the weekend arrived, and she had made prior arrangements with her companions. "Mum, an unforeseen circumstance has arisen. Lunch will undoubtedly occur next week." next week dissolved into the subsequent month, and that month, in turn, vanished into the abyss, much like all her hollow assurances. Michael was wallowing in his melancholy following the coffee shop's demise, subtly attributing his misfortunes to my perceived lack of faith in his entrepreneurial vision. In his estimation, my pessimism had infused the venture with negative energy. Kelly required immediate funds for a European educational excursion priced at $5,000, and George had concluded that he merited a respite to recover from occupational stress that never appeared to yield commensurate financial returns. At the venerable age of 70, I was engaged in freelance accounting work for 12 hours daily, accepting any client capable of remitting payment for my services. My arthritic digits ached following extended periods at the keyboard. My back protested from an unfavorable posture, and my eyes grew weary from scrutinizing figures well into the night, yet I had no alternative. The mortgage payments persisted. The utility costs for the expanded domicile were exorbitant, and 8 adults were entirely reliant on my earnings. One afternoon in December, whilst meticulously organizing invoices at my compact workspace, I unearthed an envelope that had arrived several days prior, but had been withheld from me. It originated from a distinguished real estate agency, requesting authorization to conduct property appraisals within our locale, having received inquiries from interested investors. Urban expansion had infiltrated our neighborhood, resulting in a significant appreciation in value for residences such as mine. I initiated a telephone call to the number provided on the letter, more from a sense of intrigue than any genuine inclination to divest. The agent, a spirited young man named Oscar, proposed a visit that very week for a complimentary appraisal. Madam Brooks, the real estate market in your vicinity is experiencing a remarkable surge. Comparable properties to yours are commanding prices that would astonish you. Oscar arrived on a Tuesday morning when all other household occupants were engaged in their daily pursuits. He was a gentleman in his mid-30s, impeccably attired, exuding a professional aura that inspired trust. He traversed the premises with an expert eye, capturing photographs, measuring dimensions, and assessing the structural integrity and enhancements implemented over the intervening years. "Madam," he remarked, meticulously recording figures on his tablet, "this is an exceptional property. The location is superb, the construction is in excellent condition, and the parcel size is ideal for developers contemplating luxury residential projects. Conservatively, I would estimate its market value at $800,000. If we secure the appropriate purchaser, we might even attain up to $900,000. My legs felt unsteady. $900,000? Following the liquidation of the outstanding mortgage, I would possess in excess of $800,000 unencumbered. It represented a fortune I had never conceived of possessing, ample remuneration to procure a comfortable abode for myself and live out my remaining years with dignity, free from arduous labor. How long, in your estimation, would the sale process entail, should I elect to proceed?" I inquired, endeavoring to maintain an appearance of nonchalance whilst my heart hammered against my ribs. In the prevailing market, for a property of this caliber, I would venture to say 2 months at the absolute maximum, possibly less if we are amenable to the initial serious offer presented. Oscar extended his business card with a professional demeanor. "Consider it carefully, Miss Brooks. At your convenience we stand ready to assist." That evening sleep eluded me. I wandered through the quiescent dwelling, observing every nook and cranny that Roberto and I had meticulously constructed with profound affection, recalling the joyous moments when our family comprised merely the 4 of us, envisioning the tranquility of residing alone in a compact, serene space devoid of perpetual entreaties for financial assistance. However, a sense of profound guilt enveloped me. How could I even contemplate relinquishing the family domicile? Where would Cindy, George, and Kelly reside? What fate awaited Michael, who had yet to secure stable employment? How could I abandon Elaine and Charles after so many years of shared occupancy? Roberto would undoubtedly have wished for me to preserve the family unit, would he not? Over the ensuing weeks, I guarded the secret of the real estate appraisal as if it were a highly volatile substance. I continued to endure my grueling work shifts, settling exorbitant invoices and funding the capricious desires of others. Yet now a nascent hope began to blossom within my breast. For the first time in decades, a potential avenue of escape from my gilded confinement emerged. I observed my family through a new lens, critically examining their conduct and their attitudes towards me. Cindy addressed me solely when in need of funds or favors. George treated me with a patronizing air, as if I were a befuddled elder requiring his masculine counsel for decision-making. Kelly perceived me exclusively as a financial wellspring for her adolescent impulses. Michael had mastered the art of inducing guilt, implying that my insufficient support hindered his unattainable aspirations. Elaine and Charles had grown so accustomed to their roles as perpetual guests that they had ceased any pretense of their stay being temporary. Charles would entertain inebriated companions on weekends, transforming the basement into his personal lounge. And when I voiced objections regarding the noise or disorder, he would remind me that Roberto had never exhibited such intolerance towards family. One afternoon in January, whilst immersed in the task of washing a colossal pile of dishes that no one else had undertaken, a devastating realization dawned upon me. I was not an integral part of this family. I was their domestic aid, their personal financial institution, their convenient resolution to all their monetary predicaments, yet I was neither loved nor respected nor valued as an individual. When they spoke of family, they alluded to an exclusive collective, for which I bore the membership fees, yet reaped none of the benefits. That evening I contacted Oscar. "I require a second appraisal," I stated, surprised by the newfound resolve in my voice, "and I wish to be apprised of all my options should I decide to sell." Oscar returned 2 days later, accompanied by a colleague specializing in high-value properties. The second assessment corroborated the initial findings. My residence was valued between $850,000 and $900,000, contingent upon the expediency of the sale and the caliber of purchaser secured. "Miss Brooks," Oscar confided as we reviewed the figures in my kitchen, "I must be candid with you. I already have 3 prospective clients who have perused the photographs of your property and expressed significant interest. One is a real estate developer prepared to offer cash, a transaction that could be finalized within a month at most. Another is a young family actively seeking a residence precisely like this in this locale. The third is an investor intending to redevelop properties of this nature into high-end rental complexes. 30 days. Within a single month, I could possess $900,000 in my bank account, affording me the liberty to dictate precisely how I wished to spend the remainder of my days. The allure was immense, yet I still lacked the fortitude to commit. That courage materialized a week later, during the most mortifying family dinner of my existence. The meal commenced like any other, but ultimately culminated as the final indignity in a litany of frustrations accumulated over 5 decades. It was a Sunday in February, and I had prepared chicken and dumplings, a customary weekend repast. The fragrance permeated the expansive home, and for a fleeting moment, nostalgia washed over me, recalling Roberto seated at the head of the table, offering a blessing and inquiring about each individual's week. Now, The table was populated by adults who consumed their meals in silence, engrossed in their mobile devices, utterly disconnected from one another and from me. Cindy scrolled through Instagram, occasionally displaying to George images of exotic journeys undertaken by her acquaintances. Kelly, while dining, was engaged in texting, completely disregarding any attempts at conversation. Michael had emerged from his room solely to partake in sustenance, his hair greasy and his attire consisting of the same t-shirt he had worn for 3 days. "Mum, do you have plans for next weekend?" Cindy inquired without averting her gaze from her screen. Her tone was casual, yet I recognized that subtle inflection indicative of an impending request. "It depends on your needs," I responded, serving an additional portion of dumplings onto Charles's plate, who was already on his 3rd helping without a single word of gratitude. "It's simply that Kelly desires to visit a spa with her friends to commemorate the conclusion of her examinations. You understand? Something to relax her before the resumption of classes." Cindy finally met my gaze, her expression adorned with that disingenuous smile she had perfected since adolescence. "The comprehensive package is priced at $2,500, but it includes massages, facials, manicures, pedicures, and an overnight stay at a luxurious resort." $2,500 for a teenage caprice, while I toiled through double shifts to discharge the mortgage incurred for Michael's unfulfilled ambitions. My granddaughter sought to expend an amount equivalent to 3 months of utility expenses on cosmetic treatments. "Cindy, that sum is excessive for a celebratory occasion marking examinations," I stated, striving to maintain a composed demeanor. "Perhaps we could identify a more economical alternative, or Kelly might contribute a portion of the cost through part-time employment." "Employment?" Kelly interjected with adolescent indignation. "Grandma, I am in my senior year of high school. I have no leisure for work. Furthermore, all my companions are attending this particular spa. I cannot be the sole individual absent." George elected to support his daughter with his characteristic paternalistic wisdom. "Lucy, young individuals today require experiences that foster self-esteem and social confidence. Kelly has applied herself diligently in her studies. She merits this reward. Moreover, $2,500 is not an exorbitant sum considering the comprehensive nature of the package." "It is not an exorbitant sum." The words struck me with the chilling effect of an icy slap. For a man who had not contributed financially to this household in years, who resided rent-free under my roof, who utilized my electricity for his private office, $2,500 was indeed a substantial amount. It represented weeks of arduous labor at my age. "I do not have that sum immediately accessible," I explained, sensing a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. "Household expenditures have been exceptionally high of late, and I must retain some funds for unforeseen circumstances." "Mum, you invariably present justifications when it pertains to affording us pleasantries," Cindy countered, adopting a tone of martyrdom. "Kelly rarely requests anything extravagant. This presents a singular opportunity for her to forge cherished memories with her companions prior to graduation." Michael, for the first time during the meal, raised his head, seemingly inspired by the discourse on finances. "Speaking of singular opportunities, Mum, I have an exceptional business proposition that could permanently resolve all our financial challenges." My heart gave a peculiar lurch. Another business venture from Michael invariably signified another financial catastrophe that I would be compelled to rescue with funds I did not possess. "A colleague of mine is initiating a digital marketing enterprise. He posits that if I invest $50,000 as an initial partner, I can recoup my investment within 6 months and subsequently generate perpetual passive income. His eyes gleamed with that desperate hope that invariably preceded his business failures. This is the opportune moment to engage, Mum. Digital entities represent the future. Following the coffee shop debacle, after years of unreciprocated loans, after mortgaging the house to finance his unattainable aspirations, Michael sought an additional $50,000 for yet another entrepreneurial endeavor destined for ruin. Michael, I do not possess $50,000, I stated with escalating resolve. And even if I did, I would not be inclined to invest in another project without a meticulously crafted business plan, without guarantees, without... There it is again, he interrupted, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. Always the negativity, always doubting my capabilities. Dad would have understood that sometimes one must embrace risks to... The invocation of Roberto as a rationale for his imprudence ignited something within me. Roberto had been magnanimous, but also judicious, diligent, yet grounded in reality. He would never have squandered resources on dubious schemes. Do not involve your father in this matter, I commanded, my voice quivering with suppressed indignation. Roberto labored assiduously for every dollar he earned, and he would never have sanctioned imprudent investments that jeopardized family stability. Charles seized that precise moment to contribute his inebriated sagacity. Lucy, the issue is that you have become exceedingly parsimonious with your finances over the years. You were once more magnanimous, more inclined to assist the family. Roberto would have advised you that wealth is meant for life's enjoyment, not for accumulation. Like a miser, stingy with my funds. After 50 years of subsidizing an entire family, after sacrificing my retirement, my peace of mind, my dignity for their whims and irresponsibilities, they were now labeling me as miserly because I had finally begun to question their excessive spending. Elaine nodded sagely from her seat at the table. Charles is correct. Lately, you seem altered, more self-centered. The Lucy I knew invariably prioritized family. Self-centered for toiling 12 hours a day at 70 to support them all. Self-centered for discharging a mortgage taken out to fund my son's dreams. Self-centered for questioning why my granddaughter required a $2,500 spa excursion when I could scarcely recall the last occasion I had purchased new attire for myself. George elected to assume the mantle of the family's official spokesperson. He meticulously wiped his mouth with his napkin, reclined in his chair as if delivering a patriarchal verdict, and regarded me with that condescending paternalism he had honed through years of residing rent-free under my roof. Lucy, I believe it is imperative that we engage in candid discourse regarding the family's circumstances. He commenced with the solemn tone of a corporate negotiation. This residence has become inadequate for our collective needs. Kelly is maturing and requires greater personal space. Cindy and I have contemplated expanding our family, perhaps welcoming another child. Michael necessitates room to recuperate following his business setbacks. Where was this preamble leading? My stomach began to tighten with a profound sense of foreboding. We have been discussing this amongst ourselves, George continued, gesturing as if presenting a business proposal, and we are of the opinion that it would be more advantageous for you to seek alternative accommodations, perhaps a more suitable dwelling for a lady of your years, a compact apartment in a tranquil district where you can embrace your retirement without the encumbrance of maintaining such an expansive property. The ensuing silence was palpable. They all regarded me with expectant expressions, as if they had proposed a delightful sojourn for me rather than evicting me from my own home. Find your own place, Lucy, Cindy declared, her smile tinged with insincerity. There is simply no longer adequate space for you here. It will prove beneficial for all involved. Cindy's pronouncement echoed in my ears like a death sentence. Find your own place, Lucy. There is simply no longer adequate space for you here. My own daughter, the infant I had cradled through fevers, the one I had comforted during childhood nightmares, the one I had observed taking her inaugural steps, within this very dwelling, was expelling me from my home as if I were an irksome tenant whose lease had expired. I stood there for several protracted seconds, processing the sheer magnitude of what I had just heard. 8 adults who had resided rent-free under my roof for decades, who had consumed my wealth, my energy, my entire existence, were requesting that I depart so that they might achieve greater comfort within my house. "Are you expelling me?" I inquired, my voice foreign to my own ears, a fragile, desiccated sound emanating from my throat. "It's not an expulsion, Mum," Cindy responded with that patronizing tone she employed when clarifying elementary concepts to Kelly in her youth. "It is a natural progression. Consider it. You will be liberated from the obligations of maintaining such an extensive property, from defraying exorbitant utility charges, from preparing meals for numerous individuals. You could inhabit a cozy, diminutive space where your sole responsibility is your own well-being." George nodded enthusiastically, as if endorsing a groundbreaking proposition. "Precisely, and we shall assume responsibility for the residents, undertaking the duties that have constituted a burden for you over many years. It would be akin to retiring from domestic concerns." The irony was suffocating. They would assume the burdens that had plagued me. Yet naturally, they omitted any mention of how they would finance these responsibilities without my income. In their fantastical imaginings, the house would sustain itself magically once I had departed from the scene. "And how, pray tell, will you manage the mortgage payments?" I inquired, experiencing a peculiar serenity descend upon me. "The utilities, the provisions, the expenditures that my labor currently covers." An uncomfortable silence permeated the table. Glances were exchanged as if confronting a deceptive query they had not anticipated in their ingenious scheme. Michael cleared his throat. "Well, Mum, we would of course need to implement certain financial adjustments. Perhaps each individual could contribute a trifle more, exercise greater autonomy." "Contribute a trifle more?" I repeated, observing the serene disposition morph into something more menacing. "Michael, you have not contributed financially to this household in 5 years. Your last contribution was the forfeiture of $60,000 of my funds in a coffee establishment that you transformed into your personal bar." "That is inequitable," he protested, his voice tinged with adolescent indignation. "That venture would have prospered had I received more familial backing, had there not been such pervasive negativity." "Negativity?" The word escaped my lips with the force of a guttural roar. "You characterize the fact that I toiled like a serf for 2 years to liquidate the debts incurred from your business failure as negativity?" Cindy swiftly intervened, attempting to de-escalate a situation spiraling out of control. "Mum, there is no need to revisit past missteps. We are discussing the future, what is most beneficial for all." "What is most beneficial for all?" I rose from the table, sensing 70 years of suppressed frustration beginning to surge within my chest. "Do you know what would be most beneficial for all? For each of you to finally assume accountability for your own existence." Kelly, who had remained tacit throughout the exchange, decided to offer her adolescent perspective. "Grandma, I fail to comprehend the source of your ire. We are merely suggesting that you establish your own separate domain. My friends consider it peculiar that you reside with the entire family at your age." "At my age?" As if 70 years was synonymous with being a social blight that needed to be concealed to preserve a facade of familial normalcy. And precisely where do you envision me finding this own place? I inquired, my gaze sweeping across each face gathered around the dining table. With what funds after I depleted my savings, absorbed Roberto's inheritance, and pledged my home as collateral to finance your ventures and missteps? George fidgeted uncomfortably in his seat. Lucy, I'm confident that with your pension and perhaps a part-time engagement, you could manage a modest dwelling. You require nothing extravagant. My pension, which is currently entirely allocated to servicing the mortgage I secured for your brother-in-law's unsuccessful enterprise, I reminded him, my voice rising in volume. My part-time job, which in reality entails 12 hours each day, because at 70 years of age, I'm expected to sustain 8 freeloading adults. Hey, Charles interjected, finally joining the discourse, you have no right to disparage us. We are kin. We've been present because you extended an invitation. I extended a temporary invitation, I shrieked, completely losing my composure. Temporary. Elaine, you arrived 15 years ago for a 6-month period following your separation. Charles, we offered you the spare bedroom until you could regain your footing, which was 12 years ago. Cindy and George were merely anticipating remaining until they had amassed enough for their own residence after their nuptials, and that was 25 years ago. Elaine rose indignantly. Lucy, I'm uncertain what has come over you recently, but this aggressive demeanor is uncharacteristic. Roberto would be mortified to witness you treating your family in such a manner. The invocation of Roberto as an emotional cudgel was the breaking point. Something shattered irrevocably within me, akin to a dam yielding after decades of resisting a surcharged reservoir. Do not dare utter Roberto's name, I bellowed with a ferocity previously unknown to me. Roberto toiled himself into an early grave supporting this family. Roberto succumbed to stress at 58 years old because he couldn't bear the financial strain of maintaining so many irresponsible adults. And you possess the effrontery to leverage his memory to justify your continued parasitic existence. The ensuing silence differed from what had preceded it. It was the quietude of shock, of boundaries transgressed, of painful truths finally articulated aloud. They all regarded me as if I had transformed into a dangerous stranger, as if the submissive and benevolent matriarch had been inhabited by a vengeful entity. Very well, George stated after a few moments, his tone measured yet strained. I believe we all require a period of calm to deliberate with clear minds. Perhaps this discussion has escalated beyond its intended scope. No, I interrupted him with a resoluteness that surprised even myself. This dialogue should have transpired 20 years ago. You expect me to vacate my residence, to seek out my own accommodation, to permit you to reside in comfort within the property for which I bear all costs, which I maintain and which I finance through my labor. I moved deliberately around the table, observing each countenance as if encountering them for the very first time. Cindy, you implored me to finance your wedding, your honeymoon, Kelly's quinceañera, your cosmetic treatments, your designer apparel, and now you expect me to fund a $200 spa excursion for your daughter while simultaneously evicting me from my own dwelling. Cindy lowered her gaze, incapable of meeting my eyes. George, you have resided here rent-free for 25 years. You converted my garage into your personal office. You have never contributed a single cent towards utilities. And now you instruct me to find my own domicile because there is no longer space for us within this home. George stared intently at his bowl of dumplings as if it held the universe's deepest secrets. Michael, my son, I have provided you with capital for all your failed ventures. I mortgaged the house for your disastrous coffee establishment. And now you solicit an additional $50,000 for another business endeavor. while suggesting I depart to afford you more room. Michael receded in his chair like a chastised child. Kelly, my dear granddaughter, I have subsidized your private education, your designer clothing, your social outings, your adolescent caprices, and now you find it peculiar that I inhabit my own house. Kelly remained engrossed in her mobile device. Elaine, Charles, you have occupied the status of permanent lodgers for over a decade without offering any financial contribution, and now you accuse me of selfishness for finally questioning this untenable circumstance. I completed my perambulation back to my designated spot at the table, but remained standing. I stood there, sensing a peculiar energy coursing through my veins, and sensation I hadn't experienced in decades. You are accurate on one point, I declared, my voice resonating with a newfound strength and confidence. It is indeed time for me to secure my own place, though not in the manner you envision. That evening, after everyone had retired to their individual chambers, the tense atmosphere palpable throughout the house, I sat upon my marital bed and dialed Oscar's number. It was 11 o'clock at night, but I felt compelled to speak with someone who would comprehend my predicament without casting judgment on years of decisions that now appeared demonstrably flawed. Miss Brooks, what a surprise to hear from you so late, Oscar responded, his voice professional yet kind. It's quite all right, Oscar. I wish to divest myself of the house, I informed him without preamble. Expeditiously. That developer you mentioned, the one who operates with cash, is he still amenable? There was a brief pause. Naturally, madam. In fact, I was in communication with him this week regarding another parcel, and he specifically conveyed that your residence remains his preferred acquisition. If I may inquire, what prompted this decision? Let us simply say my family provided me with a clearer perspective, I replied with a hint of bitter irony. How long would the disposition process require? Should all proceed favourably, we could have preliminary agreements signed within a week and finalise the transaction within 3 weeks at the utmost. The developer has secured pre-approved financing and is eager to commence his project. Oscar's voice conveyed an assuring efficiency. Do you require assistance in locating alternative accommodations? I am aware of several upscale condominiums that might pique your interest. I am, in fact, contemplating options beyond national borders, I stated, surprising even myself with the conviction of my resolve. Something entirely different. After concluding my call with Oscar, I sat before my laptop and commenced researching a pursuit that had been a clandestine aspiration of mine for years. Establishing residence in Europe. Roberto and I had harboured dreams of journeying through Spain and Italy upon our retirement. However, his premature demise had relegated those aspirations to the same burial ground as countless other hopes. For the subsequent few hours, I perused real estate listings in Monaco, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. The price points were surprisingly encouraging. With slightly over $800,000, I could acquire a magnificent apartment offering a panorama of the Mediterranean Sea, a prospect hitherto unimaginable in my hometown. Monaco, in particular, exerted a strong pull, compact, secure, elegant, an ideal setting for a woman of my years seeking tranquility and dignity. I discovered a penthouse apartment in Monte Carlo that captivated me. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an expansive terrace boasting a sweeping vista of the harbour, a building offering round-the-clock security, a fitness centre, a spa, and concierge services. The asking price was $850,000, roughly equating to $1 million. It would necessitate careful financial management, but was attainable if the house commanded a favourable price, and I prudently managed my remaining capital. The ensuing days were dedicated to quiet, strategic planning. Each morning I shared breakfast with my family, as if no disruption had occurred. I listened to their customary grievances. I responded to their monetary requests with adroit evasions and offered smiles when they inquired about my contemplation of their suggestion to relocate. However, in the afternoons, while they pursued their daily routines, I was diligently orchestrating my departure. I contacted the real estate agent in Monaco, who confirmed the availability of the penthouse and the feasibility of completing the transaction entirely remotely. I investigated the residency prerequisites for American citizens in Monaco. With adequate financial resources, the process proved remarkably straightforward. I contacted my banking institution and arranged for the international transfer of funds. I engaged the services of an international relocation firm specializing in luxury moves. I secured a first-class flight reservation to Nice with an open-ended return itinerary. Each implemented step instilled in me a greater sense of self-assurance and control over my own existence, a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. On Wednesday morning, Oscar arrived, bearing the sales contracts. The developer had assented to a purchase price of $950,000, an increment of $50,000 above the initial estimation, with the closing ceremony scheduled for the subsequent Friday. As I affixed my signature to the documentation at my modest desk, a wave of euphoria mingled with trepidation, reminiscent of the sensation when Roberto and I acquired our inaugural residence. "Are you entirely confident in this decision, Miss Brooks?" Oscar inquired as I initialed the final page. "It represents a rather swift transaction, and I understand the property holds sentimental significance." "I am unequivocally certain," I replied without hesitation. "This dwelling was a home when my husband was alive. Presently it is merely an expensive edifice populated by individuals who take me for granted." Over the subsequent few days, while my family continued their conventional routines, utterly unaware that their world was on the precipice of collapse, I finalized the particulars of my new existence. I initiated the wire transfer for the penthouse in Monaco. I engaged the moving company to pack my personal effects on the very day designated for the property sale's conclusion. I reserved a suite at the most distinguished hotel in Monte Carlo for my initial weeks of acclimatization. On Thursday evening, 3 days prior to the sale's closure, Cindy approached my room with a conciliatory smile. "Mother, I have been reflecting on our conversation from Sunday. Perhaps we were somewhat severe in suggesting your immediate departure. We could afford you additional time to locate an ideal abode." "That is exceedingly considerate of you," I responded, carefully folding a blouse into my discreet valise. "However, my decision has already been rendered." "Truly?" Her eyes brightened with palpable relief. "Have you identified a suitable location? Perhaps we could survey it together, assist with the relocation." "Thank you, but such assistance will not be required," I stated, experiencing a peculiar sense of tranquility. Everything has been meticulously arranged. Friday morning dawned as another ordinary day for my family. George consumed breakfast while perusing sports updates on his tablet. Cindy was engrossed in browsing spa promotions online. Kelly was lamenting her lack of appropriate attire for a social engagement scheduled for Saturday. Michael descended the stairs in his sleepwear, in search of coffee. Elaine was preparing her specialized organic breakfast, and Charles was audibly snoring from the basement. I partook of breakfast with a sense of calm, observing this familial spectacle with a fresh perspective. In mere hours it would be relegated to a poignant memory. Within a week I would awaken in my Monte Carlo penthouse, gazing upon the Mediterranean, serenaded by seagulls instead of snores, and inhaling the sea breeze rather than the aroma of Charles's soiled socks. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell resonated. It was Oscar, accompanied by the developer, a discerning gentleman in his 50s named Ivan, and a public notary to formalize the transaction. The removal vans had also arrived, colossal white vehicles emblazoned with the insignia of an international luxury relocation enterprise. George opened the door, looking bewildered. "Good morning. I believe there has been some sort of miscalculation. We were not anticipating visitors." "There is no miscalculation," I announced, appearing behind him, sales contracts in hand. "Gentlemen, please do proceed inside." The unfolding of the subsequent events possessed the quality of a slow-motion cinematic sequence. Initial bewilderment gave way to disbelief, then to palpable panic, and finally to utter despair. My family congregated in the living room, resembling an emergency war council. Voices overlapped, each individual striving to comprehend how their secure and comfortable existence was dissolving before their very eyes. "You sold the house without informing us," Cindy shrieked, her voice bordering on hysteria. "How could you perpetrate such an act? We reside here. This is our home." "It is my house," I gently corrected her. "It has invariably been my house. You have been guests who lingered far beyond the anticipated duration." Michael paced the room like a caged predator. "Mother, this is utterly preposterous. Where are we to reside? Where am I to stay while I endeavor to secure employment?" "Those are decisions you ought to have made years ago," I retorted, signing the final documents while the notary meticulously reviewed each clause. George attempted to assert control over the situation with his customary male assertiveness. "Lucy, this is profoundly irrational. You cannot enact such drastic measures without family consultation. We can explore resolutions, make financial arrangements." "The sole financial arrangements I require are those I am presently executing," I stated, accepting the $950,000 check extended to me by Ivan with a professional smile. Kelly commenced weeping theatrically. "Grandmother, you cannot inflict this upon us. Where am I to live? How will I complete my secondary education?" "Your parents will need to address those concerns," I replied, experiencing a fleeting pang of guilt that I swiftly suppressed. "They are, after all, responsible adults, are they not?" The crew from the moving company commenced packing my possessions with military precision, while my family observed in a state of utter stupefaction. They had arrived with labeled crates, protective wrapping, and specialized apparatus for transporting delicate articles internationally. Every motion served as a tangible reminder that this was not an empty threat or a transient emotional outburst. It was the meticulous execution of a meticulously conceived plan. "Internationally?" Elaine inquired, her voice trembling upon overhearing one of the workers confirm the delivery destination in Monaco. "You are departing the country?" "I intend to live my life," I responded, overseeing the careful packing of photographs depicting Roberto and me from our honeymoon, an act I should have undertaken years prior. Charles had descended from the basement, clad in slippers and a t-shirt, still carrying the faint aroma of alcohol from the preceding night. "Lucy, you cannot proceed with this. Where am I to reside? I possess no employment. I have no savings." "You are 53 years of age, Charles," I stated, without turning to face him. "Perhaps it is time you learned to exist as an autonomous adult." George adopted a more calculated approach, seating himself on the sofa as if we were about to engage in a civilized negotiation. "Lucy, I acknowledge your distress stemming from Sunday's conversation. It is possible we did not articulate our concerns in the most effective manner, but by divesting yourself of the house so precipitously, you are penalizing the entire family for a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, finally turning to confront him directly. "George, you explicitly instructed me to find my own domicile, because there is simply no room for me here any longer. This is precisely what I am doing." But we did not intend for you to sell the ancestral home, Cindy protested, genuine tears streaming down her cheeks. We envisioned you renting a nearby apartment, something temporary, until we devised a more equitable resolution. What more equitable resolution? I inquired, crossing my arms. You harbored the expectation that I would labor until my demise to perpetually ensure your comfort, that I would sacrifice the twilight years of my existence supporting 8 adults who have never exhibited any genuine inclination towards self-sufficiency. Kelly drew nearer, employing the emotional manipulation she had inherited genetically. Grandmother, I implore you to reconsider. I pledge to reform, to embrace greater responsibility, to secure a part-time position. Kelly, you are 17 years of age. Your obligation is to pursue your studies and prepare for higher education, I stated with increased gentleness. The responsibility of providing for you financially rests with your parents, not with me. Michael had remained silent for several minutes, undoubtedly processing the tangible ramifications of the situation. He finally erupted with a fury he had not displayed since his adolescence. This is beyond belief. After all we have done for you, you abandon us in this manner. All we have done for you? The question emerged as a bitter laugh. Michael, could you elucidate precisely what you have accomplished for me over the past 15 years? We provided you with companionship. We cared for you after Father's passing. We have been your family. You offered me companionship when you required funds, I interjected. You cared for me by compelling me to labor as a serf to sustain you, and you have been my family solely when it proved economically advantageous. Ivan, the developer, approached discreetly. Ms. Brooks, all documentation is in order. The keys can be transferred at your earliest convenience. I am ready at this moment, I declared, retrieving the house keys from my handbag. They were the same keys Roberto had presented to me with such pride 37 years prior when we purchased our first abode together. For a fleeting instant, a sense of nostalgia washed over me, but I promptly suppressed it. Roberto was deceased. This house had devolved into a confinement. It was time for liberation. Wait, Cindy implored desperately. You cannot simply relinquish them in such a manner. We require time to pack our belongings, to ascertain alternative accommodations. You have until 6 o'clock this evening, Ivan informed them with professional courtesy. Beyond that hour, this property will officially be mine, and I will require it to be vacated to commence demolition on Monday. Demolition? The word struck my family with the force of a nuclear detonation. The dwelling they had perpetually considered their own was not merely being sold. It was slated for complete obliteration to facilitate the construction of a luxury condominium complex. They're going to tear down the house, Kelly whispered with genuine horror. They will construct something superior, I explained. Modern condominiums for families capable of affording them through their own financial resources. The removal workers had concluded the packing of my essential possessions, the remaining furnishings and articles I was relinquishing, as my new existence held no space for vestiges of the past. My penthouse in Monaco would be entirely appointed with contemporary and sophisticated pieces, devoid of the painful recollections of decades of familial exploitation. Madam, are you prepared to depart? The moving supervisor inquired. Completely prepared, I responded, taking my handbag and personal satchel. Elaine obstructed my path to the exit, tears welling in her eyes. Lucy, please, we are sisters. We have been united since childhood. You cannot forsake me in this fashion. Ayla, you abandoned me 15 years ago when you decreed my home to be a perpetual complimentary lodging, I stated, gently maneuvering around her. You have never been my sister here. You are a recipient of my generosity. Charles attempted one final emotional appeal. Roberto would be churning in his grave, witnessing your actions towards the family he cherished so dearly. That proved to be the ultimate strain upon my waning patience. I turned to him, a fury I had suppressed for years now unleashed. Roberto would be churning in his grave, witnessing how you all transformed me into a virtual slave following his demise. I bellowed, my voice reverberating throughout the entire structure. Roberto labored himself into an early grave supporting this family, these sycophants. I proceeded towards the front door, but George intercepted me with one last desperate maneuver. Lucy, if you depart in this manner, you can never return. Once you cross that threshold, there will be no family awaiting you here. I halted and met his gaze directly. George, there has not been a family here for years, merely individuals subsisting gratuitously off my labor. And what if you fall ill? If you require assistance? If you experience loneliness? Cindy inquired in a final gambit of manipulation. Who will attend to you in a foreign country? I shall engage professional caregivers with my own funds, I replied. It will prove more cost-effective and efficient than sustaining 8 adults who feign affection for me. Michael made one last emotional overture. Mother, I understand you are incensed, but this is excessively extreme. We can alter. We can constitute a superior family unit. Michael, you have had decades to implement change, I stated with an infinite weariness. The sole individual who will undergo transformation now is myself. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the street, where a black limousine I had procured for my airport transfer awaited. The uniformed chauffeur received my luggage with discreet professionalism and opened the rear door for me. Before entering the vehicle, I turned one final time towards the house that had served as my abode for 37 years. My 8 family members stood at the doorway, their expressions encompassing a spectrum from utter disbelief to abject panic, finally comprehending that their source of income and comfort was irrevocably vanishing. Find your own places, I instructed them in a firm voice. There is simply no room for you here any longer. I entered the limousine and directed the driver to proceed. As we departed, my gaze lingered in the rearview mirror, observing my family standing on the curb, watching their familiar, secure existence recede. For the first time in many years, they would face their challenges independently, without my financial contributions, my labor, or my personal sacrifices. My flight to Nice was scheduled to depart in 3 hours. In 8 hours, I would be in my new penthouse, inhaling the refreshing Mediterranean air, embarking on the life Roberto and I had envisioned but could never share. The first-class journey to Nice proved to be the most profoundly freeing experience of my 70 years. As the aircraft ascended above the city that had long felt like my confinement, a monumental burden lifted from my shoulders. It was the first time since Roberto's passing that I was free from anxieties about outstanding debts, constant requests for money, or the persistent reliance of grown children on my efforts for their survival. The flight attendant presented me with champagne in an exquisite crystal flute, and I silently raised my glass to Roberto. My dearest, I murmured, my eyes tracing the clouds bathed in the setting sun. I am finally living the dreams we envisioned together. Forgive me for taking so long to gather my courage. I arrived in Nice at 10 in the morning, local time. My real estate agent from Monaco, a distinguished gentleman named Evan Dubois, greeted me with a subtle sign and a professional demeanor. The 40-minute drive in a Mercedes along the coast towards my new penthouse revealed the most breathtaking Mediterranean vistas I had ever encountered. Palm trees swayed, opulent yachts bobbed, 5-star hotels lined the shore, and the sea shimmered with an impossible shade of blue that had captivated my imagination for years. Madam Brooks, welcome to your new abode, Ivan announced as we entered a private elevator. I am confident you will be exceptionally pleased with your selection. As the elevator doors opened directly into my living room, a wave of sheer delight nearly overwhelmed me. The penthouse surpassed even the most glamorous photographs. Italian marble floors, expansive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic vista of Monte Carlo Harbour, and designer furnishings in elegant cream and gold hues adorned the space. The kitchen was a marvel of modern design, fully equipped with the latest German appliances, but it was the terrace that truly stole my breath. 3,000 square feet of outdoor splendor, featuring an infinity pool, a meticulously maintained vertical garden, a dedicated dining area, and an unobstructed view of multi-million-dollar yachts gently gliding on the crystalline waters. This was the very paradise Roberto and I had conjured in our most ambitious imaginings. The building provides 24-hour security, a dedicated concierge service, a spa, a fitness center, and room service from esteemed 5-star establishments, Ivan explained as I drifted through my new domain as if in a dream. Your neighbors include prominent international business figures, celebrated artists, and European aristocracy. Absolute discretion and refined living are assured. That inaugural night, I slept soundly in a king-sized bed adorned with Egyptian silk sheets, lulled by the gentle lapping of waves against the moored yachts. There was no disruptive snoring from Charles, no grumbling from Kelly, no disputes between George and Cindy, and no discordant guitar melodies from Michael. Only a profound golden silence, an utter sense of tranquility, and the incredible realization that I had finally arrived home. The initial months were a period of remarkable adaptation. I engaged Evelyn, a 50-year-old French woman with extensive experience assisting affluent international residents, as my personal assistant. She expertly managed all practical matters, including shopping, medical appointments, and providing translation services when my rudimentary French proved insufficient, as well as overseeing household arrangements. I established routines previously unattainable in my former life. Each morning I enjoyed breakfast on the terrace, perusing international news. I swam in my private pool as the sun painted the Mediterranean sky. Lunches were at elegant harbourside restaurants, and my afternoons were devoted to exploring the region's museums, art galleries, and botanical gardens. My health experienced a dramatic improvement. The chronic stress I had carried for decades evaporated entirely. My blood pressure normalized, and the persistent back pain, a lingering consequence of years of overexertion, subsided. For the first time in decades, I enjoyed 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep each night. However, the most empowering aspect was my complete financial autonomy. After acquiring the penthouse, I had approximately $200,000 remaining, which I invested prudently in low-risk European funds. The income generated from these investments, coupled with my pension converted to euros, provided more than ample financial security, allowing me to live comfortably without ever needing to work again. 3 months after my arrival, I received the first call from Cindy. She had somehow obtained my contact information through international banking channels, likely by employing someone to acquire confidential details. "Mom, please answer," her desperate voice pleaded from the voicemail. "We are living in an appalling apartment. Kelly is utterly heartbroken. George has lost his employment. We desperately require your assistance. Please forgive us and come to us." I deleted the message without replying. The calls persisted for weeks. Michael's tearful account of living with a friend due to his inability to afford rent. Elaine's increasingly frantic pleas for financial aid to secure an apartment, as Charles had vanished after their assets were sold. George's attempts to negotiate a family loan to restore their financial stability. I disregarded them all without exception. 6 months later, the calls ceased. They had evidently accepted the permanent cessation of their effortless financial support and the necessity of forging independent lives. While a part of me harbored a flicker of curiosity about their current circumstances, the overwhelming sentiment was one of profound relief, no longer burdened by their choices. 1 year after settling in Monaco, I celebrated my 72nd birthday with an elegant soiree on my terrace. I had cultivated friendships among my neighbours, sophisticated women from diverse backgrounds who had chosen Monaco to relish their twilight years with both dignity and opulence. We raised our glasses of Dom Perignon champagne as the sun dipped below the Mediterranean horizon, and for the first time in decades, a genuine sense of happiness washed over me. Do you ever miss your previous life? Margaret, a 75-year-old Englishwoman who had sold her London company to relocate here after her husband's passing, inquired. I miss my husband, I replied candidly, but I do not miss being enslaved to irresponsible adults who misinterpreted my generosity as an obligation. During my second year in Monaco, I commenced writing my memoirs, not for publication, but as a therapeutic process, to re-evaluate decades of decisions that I now understood had been profoundly misguided. Reflecting on Roberto helped me reconnect with the man he truly was, generous yet not gullible, loving yet not susceptible to exploitation, a devoted family man but never a self-sacrificing martyr. Roberto would have been immensely proud of my ultimate decision. He always desired my happiness and for me to save a life, not to sacrifice my well-being for individuals who failed to appreciate it. His untimely demise was a direct consequence of the immense stress incurred by supporting a family that took his efforts for granted. In my third year here, I finally discovered complete inner peace. I no longer awoke with thoughts of pending bills, financial demands, or the responsibilities of others. My mornings were now dedicated to planning museum visits, exploring new culinary experiences, or arranging excursions across Europe with my newfound companions. My financial resources are sufficient for the remainder of my life, as I am finally allocating them towards my own fulfillment. Weekly spa treatments, exquisite attire, enriching cultural expeditions, dinners at Michelin-starred establishments, and original artworks to grace my penthouse. All the pleasures I had denied myself for decades while underwriting the whims of others. On certain evenings as I stand on my terrace, observing the illuminated yachts gently swaying in the harbour, my thoughts drift to my family. I often wonder if Cindy has finally learned to sustain herself on her own income, if Michael has secured a stable career, if Kelly has grasped that true life demands personal endeavour. A part of me hopes they have matured, that my departure instilled in them a sense of responsibility that 30 years of comfort had failed to cultivate. But predominantly, I feel an overwhelming sense of liberation and ultimate freedom. This morning, as I glided through my infinity pool, gazing out at the world's most magnificent seascape, I recalled Cindy's precise words to me on that fateful night. Find your own place, Lucy. There is simply no room for you here anymore. She was correct about one thing: there was no longer a place for us together. However, the sanctuary I have discovered is not a cramped apartment for a disposable elder. It is a gilded palace where I can finally inhabit the life of the queen Roberto always believed me to be. I have found my rightful place, and here in my penthouse with a breathtaking view of Mediterranean paradise, I finally perfectly belong.